Welcome to D&D Out Loud with Ben Riggs. Episode 78. This is an RPG historian you have to hear from. A conversation with Shannon Appelcline.
Welcome once again, Internet, to D&D Out Loud with Ben Riggs. I am apparently controversial, apparently infamous D&D historian, and author of Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons & Dragons. I am Ben Riggs, and over the past 13 years of writing and podcasting, I have met hundreds of creative geniuses in and around the world of tabletop role-playing games. Here on this show, I ask two of these flaming torches of the human imagination to come on and have a fascinating discussion, which I then record and send out into the world. Today, I shall be playing the role of one of these torches, and the other will be burning bright Shannon Appelcline. He is the mind behind Designers and Dragons, which chronicles our hobby's wild past, from basement print runs to global pop culture phenomenon. Shannon has done the research, interviewed the legends, and connected the dots between decades of dice rolling history. So grab your character sheet, because today we're diving deep into how our favorite games became the worlds we live in. Last time you were on, I wrote a sonnet. I wasn't sure how I could top that, so I decided to not try. And I was like, I can't just read the sonnet again. That seems so repetitive. So hopefully that works for you.
And I feel like I really missed the opportunity not to write a sonnet for you now. Oh, well.
Well, maybe you'll be on again sometime. I should have. Next time it'll be a sestina. I can't do a sestina. That's not a good use of my time. Like, charming as that may be. All right. So, Shannon, let's start with, what have you got on backer kit right now?
Right now I have on backer kit Designers and Dragons Origins, which is my newest set of 4 books, because I apparently produce books in 4 book sets. They are the product histories of early Dungeons and Dragons, meaning that there are approximately 320 articles across the 4 books that talk about every single product that TSR produced for OD&D, AD&D First Edition, and Basic Dungeons and Dragons, and just a little bit of Mystara and AD&D 2E, just to have that line complete. So everyone talks about the history of the product, some of their common tropes, and some of the stuff they introduced, whether it be new rules, new NPCs, new monsters, etc. I also kind of hid in there a bunch of what I call mini histories, which I do them in boxes in the main Designers and Dragons Company histories, but here I just do them in entries in the history. And so there's 80 mini histories of designers. Pretty much every single designer who produced one of these products has somewhere between 1 and 3 or 4 paragraphs talking about who they are. I also had some mini histories of elements in there, you know, like supplements, monster supplements, tower adventures, things like that. When something came up, I'd sometimes write a little history of that too. So it's histories all the way down.
Can I read what I assume is a kind of the mini history you're talking about here on Rob Kuntz?
Yes.
So this is introducing Rob Kuntz. The Greyhawk supplement is usually considered the work of Gygax, but a co-author is credited, Robert J. Kuntz. He was a Lake Geneva local who met Gygax and family in 1968 while he was still a teenager. He quickly became Gygax's protege, a member of the LGTSA. Is that Lake Geneva Tactical Studies Association?
I think that's right.
Yeah. A co-founder of the Castle and Crusade Society, and even the editor of the Society's zine, The Domesday Book, which carried both the original chainmail rules and early Blackmore reports. Kuntz not only joined Gygax in the exemplar Blackmore game that Dave Arneson and Dave McGarry ran in late 1972, but he also played the second ever game of D&D itself, and was soon running his own campaign set in Calibrune, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Wow. Where do I want to go from here? I guess I'm going to stay in my marketing mode and say, okay, so you've written this amazingly detailed history. So is any of this repeated from your histories on Drive-Thru?
Yeah, that's where these originated from. Drive-Thru 2012 asked me to do product histories for their then new set of PDFs that they were putting out for D&D on the D&D Classics website. And when we negotiated for those, I kept the rights to be able to use them for myself after a short period of exclusivity, which is over by almost a decade at this point. So I started working on my own projects in 2020 after I moved to Hawaii. And one of those was starting to compile those into actual books. And so often I needed to expand them. Sometimes I needed to update them because there'd been a new interview. Most notably, I needed to regularize them in that the ones that were on the website were kind of all over the place. And I came up with a specific format: talk about art, talk about the history, talk about the rules, etc. And also when I put them all into that format, I'd often say, oh, I didn't talk about the art for this one, and there's something interesting here. Not every product history has all of the categories, but at least it gave me a framework to look through and say, oh, I've missed this topic. I just did a review over on my blog, designersanddragons.com, of what one of these product histories looked like over at the D&D Classic site, DM's Guild now, and in the book. And you can see how the art got totally rearranged, and you can see some of the new topics. It was under Illafarn, which was the first Forgotten Realms adventure written by Steve Perrin, and one of the additions was a mini history for Steve Perrin. So lots of expansion from there, but I think people would be thrilled even if we were just publishing them, because that was one of the biggest questions I got for years when I was actively writing them for Drive-Thru RPG.
I mean, so listeners, if you have not read one of these histories on Drive-Thru RPG, and I'm going to just repeat the thing I kind of say about all your writing all the time, it's just so delightful. It's it's behind the music, but for people who were really into role-playing games, here's what was going on with the product. You kind of cover everything, because you'll cover like personalities, you'll cover the content of the product, the circumstances of its creation. If I were to look up Dragons of Despair, the first Dragonlance adventure, I'm almost certain that goes as far back as like Tracy Hickman, like driving to to Lake Geneva from Utah and having a conversation with his wife where they're like, you know what, Dungeons and Dragons needs more dragons. And that being one of the things that sparks, Dragonlance. And it's all just compulsively readable. Again, a thing I've said 1,000 times, during the darkest days of the pandemic, I put Designers and Dragons on my phone and it replaced doom scrolling for me, which I hope is not praise that has not worn itself out with repetition. So I will remain in marketing mode for one more question and ask, so if people are going to back this, what do they get? How does it work? What's the pitch?
So we have 3 different packages that are pretty much whatever format you prefer. There's one package that is a PDF format, and it's all 4 books. And there's one package that's an audiobook format, and it's all 4 books. And there's one package that is a hardcover format, which is the hardcover print books and the slipcase to have them all in. And so whichever format you like, it's there. The hardcovers are only available as the set, though I think both of the others you can do add-ons for 1 by 1 if you just want one. And we also have the original Designers and Dragons Company's histories out there too. So much of my history writing is available all there at once. And I think we've had just more than 50% going for the hardcovers and just under 50% going for the PDFs. So it is a great variety.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely put a link in the show notes. I'll put that right here, link to BackerKit. Yeah, like as much as I would like to have physical copies, the convenience of the PDFs are just so strong, because I just never know where I'm going to be or what the circumstances will be when it's like, oh God, I need to see what Shannon said about this. Sometimes it's in the middle of the panel.
Fortunately, the PDFs are also available if you get the hardcovers. They are added straight in.
further temptation. Thank you, Shannon. All right. So, I've asked you a lot of questions. Do you want to start a topic, or should I keep introducing things?
Well, I thought the great thing about Coming to Talk is that we are two historians, both talking about role playing, and more so, you've put out one of the definitive books on the kind of mid to late history of TSR, which is Slaying the Dragon, which is right over my shoulder there. And I've now finally got a book, a whole bunch of books out on TSR and D&D too. And I feel like they're very different books. Yours is focused on a business history. It kind of leads up to the question of why did TSR go out of business? At least that's how I read it as, and kind of lays all of the foundation for that, puts all of the players into place, and explains how things, including their product lines, led them there. And mine, besides going earlier than the majority of your book, though your book, of course, goes all the way back, it's instead focused on the products, and it's saying, hey, what are these products? And so one of the interesting things I thought maybe we could talk about is the interface between these, because there certainly is an interface, but with us each, kind of going in a slightly different direction. And John Peterson, of course, who is the other one who's done some of the real premier books on TSR, his are more business related too, and in some cases more design related. But I thought, what do we see as the interface? How does the business impact the product design? And how does the product design affect the business? And so I was looking at kind of the timeline of TSR, and the first really big business thing that I see that occurs, maybe it's not the first big one, but it's the first big one that I think we can kind of speculate on, is end of 1975, I think it is. Dave Arneson leaves because he's pissed that D&D is getting so commercial, that TSR is getting so commercial. So one of the things I wondered and find it kind of interesting is, what do you think would have happened if Dave Arneson had stuck around? What would D&D have been different then?
Wow. Where to go with that one?
Totally sprung this on you. So it's not prepared far in advance, but like I said, I just kind of saw this interface between product and business on our two different writings on the topic.
Creatives seem to either have a great flash or a slow burn. Again, and there are people that kind of do both, right? Like, Steven Spielberg has certainly had hits throughout his career, but man, if George Lucas had died in like 1986, would his legacy be really any different? It depends on how attached you are to the prequels. I'm not super attached. I know there's people who are, but like, if Lucas had died in 1986, I think his work would have been complete and his legacy rather similar. And talking about Arneson leaving is a similar question. So audience members, one of the critiques of Arneson is he couldn't finish anything. He has other credits throughout the tabletop role-playing game industry. He has a Shadowrun adventure called DOA, as I recall. And again, there was the Blackmore supplement for D&D, but if you talk to Tim Kask about Blackmore, the story Tim Kask tells is, so I should add, Blackmore was Arneson's original campaign. You could argue it was maybe the first D&D campaign. Again, John Peterson has convinced me of the futility of calling anything the first D&D campaign or the first D&D adventure, but you could have argued that Blackmore is the first D&D adventure. And when that was supposed to be made into a supplement for actual Dungeons and Dragons, Tim Kask describes Arneson like turning over a bunch of notes and being like, here, make something out of this. And Tim Kask then goes and makes a book. And Tim Kask tells the story where he's the actual writer, but Arneson gets the credit because it's his campaign and his idea. Blackmore also had the first adventure published by TSR, right?
Yeah, Temple of the Frog is in there.
Yeah. Um,
And I think that
and
was probably the most innovative thing in there, because
yeah,
it was an adventure, and so they hadn't done that before. And also, it really had a strong sense of place in a way that I don't know the Giants ones necessarily did as much, which were the first ones TSR actually published standalone. It, you know, this temple, with this cult of frog worshippers, and Saint Stephen the Rock is running it, and he's actually an alien from another campaign that they were running. And so I just got such of a feel for Blackmore from there that I didn't necessarily from one of the others. So, you talk about ideas, that's the idea there. But if you actually look at the adventure too, it's a bit of a mess, and that you can't quite see how Dungeons and Dragons players could play it, because there's literally hundreds of cultists in there that they have to fight. You'd have to take an army in, and I would have to guess that's what happened in Blackmore, but it wasn't necessarily in line. So I think it's an interesting, data point for what would it have looked like if Dave Arneson was producing additional content, because the ideas are fabulous. And the execution, as you said, he didn't finish things. My favorite part of the Tim Kask story is that he describes the Blackmore content that he got as, he dumped it, I think, in a bushel basket or something. And, that kind of feels for me like some type of metaphor for how complete the content was. I think my guess when I went through it all, if I remember, is that maybe 60% of what is in Blackmore is actually Arneson's, with Steve Marsh probably making up the majority of the difference, because everything that's underwater stuff, which is a lot of the monsters and some of the rules for the actual adventuring underwater, those came from Steve Marsh, extracted from a book that he'd offered up or was prepping at the time on the elemental planes, which we sadly never saw.
so in answer to your actual question, I will boldly say that Arneson's great work on D&D was done, and if he had remained at the company, I think he would have produced a rather mediocre amount of material. Because like he clearly he's a guy who needed to work with a collaborator. Gygax was also a guy who needed to work with a collaborator, and they had this momentary collaboration that was incredibly fruitful for both. And then after their split, I mean, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is very good, but it's really only good for 1977, 78, 79. Greg Stafford was producing remarkable stuff within just a few years of that. I'm going to pronounce the name wrong, but Greg Kostikian, the guy who did Ghostbusters and Star Wars for West End Games, like within just a few years of that, he'll be doing some remarkable designs. It seems like Gygax and Arneson's great idea was the idea of fantasy role-playing games. I should rephrase, the fantasy role-playing practice, the experience of it. And they put a lot of things into that made D&D the sensation that it became. But everything after that is, I think, coda, decline. Their great work had passed. So I will boldly say that had either of them stayed on, I don't know that great work would have followed. There was an awful lot of like, oh my gosh, Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford are leaving Wizards of the Coast. What's gonna happen? And it's like, it's gonna be fine. Like, they did their bit, they had their part, they sang their song. And Perkins had his hands in some of 3.5, some of 4, and then 5, and then 2024 D&D. Crawford, he was on the team for 4th. I think he was on the team for 3.5 as well. I mean, that's a long time working on D&D. My gosh. And it's not a reflection on the quality of their work in any way, shape, or form. But, after your song is sung, you can just leave the stage. It's fine. Have you read Shadowdark?
I haven't read it. I've read enough of it to feel pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it. I've ran it a ton. Like, I would certainly be interested in a like Shadow, like a second edition Shadow Dark at some point, but like I would not look at it and think, oh, Kelsey's going to do something really different here and totally knock my socks off in a new direction. I would love to see a new Kelsey game, in the same way that I'd be very interested in a new Chris Perkins, Jeremy Crawford game. Uh, and I have more faith in those three designers producing something new and interesting that would blow my socks off than I do with Gygax or Arneson, because neither of them did go on to produce anything that was new and fresh and blew my socks off. That's a really long answer to your question that boils down to, I think they were done. There we go. I could have said it all like that. What do you think?
I think that you offer an interesting hypothesis that I generalize, which is that I think TSR was probably benefited in the 70s and the 80s by the fairly high level of turnover among designers. I'm going to say designers there because I'm not sure that that applies to artists. But over the course of 1974 to 1985 or 1986 or so, we lost Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, and Frank Mintzer, who at various times were kind of the main designers of D&D. And if we, hadn't had Gary Gygax off in California first, starting around 83, and then out of the company at the end of 85, Frank Mintzer went to put together the BECMI version of Basic Dungeons and Dragons, probably. And especially that basic set, it was just such a great introductory set. I mean, each introductory set was better than the one before it for teaching D&D. And I'm sure it's one of the things that really brought a lot of people in. I mean, I came in through the version before at BX. And then he went on and he did all of these things that just weren't in D&D at the time. The Warfare of the Companion set and the Playing Gods of the Immortal set, which is pretty much a different game. And, all of that innovation wouldn't have come if Gary Gygax was still holding the reins tight. And you take the step beyond that, and David Zeb Cook, Steve Winter, and the rest put out AD&D second edition in 1989, and they really clean up the game. I mean, you say AD&D was a good game for 1970s, and I agree, and I can say that having in the odd aughts or so played a campaign. And it's the mechanics are complex. And I had the same experience playing it in the odd odds that I had playing it in the 80s, which is I had to ignore half of the rules to not, go crazy. Weapon speed and other things like that I think the vast majority of people don't play in. I mean, I think that's why basic D&D and OD&D have been the ones that have really excelled in the OSR. It's because they're simpler games that, hold up somewhat better in the modern day, especially if you have actual explanations for how things work in OD&D. But kind of my long response is, I think you're right, and maybe Dave Arneson wouldn't have contributed a lot. We have examples of both of their additional games, Adventures in Fantasy for Dave Arneson, which pretty much no one's ever heard of, and Cyber Commando for Gary Gygax, which I don't know, maybe people have still heard of, but if so, they've heard it mocked. And Mythos, which, I mean, Mythics was another very, very complex game. And yeah, they both kept coming out with game systems, especially Gygax, and none of them set the world afire. So I think maybe freeing up that space for other designers who didn't have the same baggage, the same need to keep the game the same because it was close to their heart, probably benefited the whole company during that period.
Yeah. I'm thinking about designers now that had a long creative life, and like Greg Stafford comes to mind. John Wick, I don't know, maybe. Like John Wick had a lot of good stuff in the late 90s, but then maybe that was it. I guess I shouldn't put John Wick on there because like Stafford had a career, I'd say, of decades. Not that John Wick isn't still out there designing things, but like
Yeah,
Seventh Sea. Go ahead.
it's a little hard to assess Greg's because he was always more the storyteller than the designer. And so, you have Pendragon, which I consider one of the finest role-playing games out there, and that was his design. And you have Prince Valiant. But really, when I look at what I find amazing from him, it's mostly Glorantha, from him writing about it in college to him still putting out his pre-finished works very late in his life. And that I think was a creative career that lasted decades, that was just as good at the start and the end. But it's a little hard for me to assess the design because, like I said, it's mainly those ones. Robin Laws did Hero Wars, Steve Perrin did RuneQuest. I think Greg did contribute to, say, Ghostbusters, which you mentioned, because it actually came in from Chaosium before West End Games developed it. But it's a little hard for me to assess the actual design work of Greg as a longer thing, because he cared more about telling the stories, and so that's most of what he did, other than kind of that tight period in the 80s.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know what Glorantha is, could you tell them what Glorantha is?
Yeah, Glorantha is Greg Stafford's fantasy world that is the heart of RuneQuest, and it was the heart of the HeroQuest / Hero Wars game when that was out. It is a world that is built on man's interactions with mythology, and that's really what makes it strong. He came up with this heavily developed mythical cycle, and he came up with ways for man to interact with it, repeating those stories in some ways. And some of that took quite a while to come out because he always had this idea in his head, but it really took until Robin Laws came out with the HeroQuest game that we mentioned, that you really could do the interaction with the myths. It also was a Bronze Age setting, and so that was very unusual for role-playing at the time, when everything was, pseudo medieval. And he came out with it originally for his fiction writing, like I said, and then it developed into a war game, which was White Bear and Red Moon, and then it was the heart of RuneQuest, and it is rather shockingly something from the 60s, 70s that still exists very robustly today, because Chaosium's current version of RuneQuest is RuneQuest Adventuring in Glorantha, and I've got a few dozen books on my shelves for it, much of it from fan productions, but a considerable amount.
Yeah, like it's fascinating. I hope that it's able to make the leap to a new generation. I'm not sure that it is.
Yeah.
I want to say 6. I think you recommended 6 seasons in Sarder to me, unless you didn't. I think you did.
I don't know if I did, but I certainly would. It's possibly the best adventure that's been produced for the new edition of RuneQuest.
Yeah, and I picked that up and I looked at it and I'm like, oh, I think I kind of get it. Like, I feel like if I ran that, I think it would be like I get RuneQuest. But when at least when I look at RuneQuest, I'm like, okay, I can see that there is something of some value here. I hope that it is able to speak to a new generation. See, my version of this is probably Rokugan for Legend of the Five Rings. Played an awful lot of Legend of the Five Rings. Absolutely love it. Love that world. Love the history of it. But again, I don't think that it's making a great leap to a new generation of fans. And I had someone try to sell me on Tecumel, if I'm even saying that right. Yeah, for those of you unfamiliar, Tecumel is the world of the Empire of the Petal Throne by M.A.R. Barker, and it's kind of like, I'm going to say it's a South Asian fantasy. And when it was first published, did it have its own rule set?
Yeah, it was pretty much a variant of D&D when it first came out.
Okay, and it was published by TSR, and like, it always seemed kind of fine. Then it came out the guy was a Nazi, and that really seems to ruin the world for me. Like, it almost doesn't matter how cool this world is. The yuck there is kind of so yucky that I just don't think it's going to work for me.
Yeah, and my the thing that really put me off of it when that came out, that M.A.R. Barker had written a pro-Nazi book, basically, was that I'm like, how much of that is incorporated into the underlying foundation of the world design? And the people who are big fans of it, some of whom are the ones guiding its development since Barker's death, they say, oh no, there's nothing there. And maybe they're right, but as you say, it creates that yuck factor. But generally, I feel like these classic games that we're talking about, that they're healthier than they've ever been in the 21st century. Well, since they were originally out, but I don't know if that's just selling to old people like me, or if it's actually attracting new people.
Yeah, I mean, like Glorantha, the RuneQuest starter set is pretty good. They tried hard there. I can see they tried hard. And again, I've talked to a lot of the Chaosium guys. I'm not sure why they think RuneQuest is so good. Like, and it can be hard. Like, if you were like, why was Rokugan so good? Why was I so absorbed by that setting and story for like 10 years? And I would say that part of it is I like games with restrictions on violence, and Rokugan has a ton of restrictions on violence, which I find then forces you into other play. And the first story arc of the game was the clan that seemed kind of evil did a really evil thing and killed the emperor and tried to overthrow the empire, and there's a big war, and that meta plot was so engaging and amazing. And again, if you didn't read games in the late I guess I'm just gonna say the 1990s, if you were not alive in the 1990s to buy role-playing game products, it was like every product would have a little bit of story of what's happening in the world, and it would move the world forward just a little bit. So you kind of felt like whatever else is going on in the books, you had to keep buying them so you could keep up with the meta plot of what was going on. So there was an aesthetic literary experience that came with reading these books that you could then bring out and play, which is a ton of fun, but is really hard to then catch up on afterwards. And I think that is what the experience that made that world so engaging to me. And I can see how that would be reproducible at this point. And you almost have to be like, well, are you making something for guys like me who lived the Scorpion Clan coup plot and just loved it? But if you're doing that, how many people are you cutting out that might like the game that know nothing about it? But again, the challenge I would lay down for RuneQuest and Glorantha is, like, again, I don't know why they like it so much. It's fine. It's not bad or anything, but like, again, people are like at an 11 out of 10 on this. And again, starter is good, but this is a thing I'm going to stop rambling about Glorantha. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, I can offer some answers, though they might not be answers that would be meaningful to anyone else. The game system, the world of Glorantha, I think allows for rich storytelling communities. Opportunities. And so, I've written a lot of myths related to Glorantha, and I've had a lot of fun with them. And so they brought out my creativity. And so that's been part of it, that it felt like Greg really created a world where you can see lots of stories to be told, and you might want to tell them. But, sitting down, writing fiction related to a setting, it's not necessarily what's going to get people into a role-playing game. The game system is somewhat complex, I think, compared to a lot of modern systems, but it feels very, looking at it from a psychological point of view, feels very Skinner box to me. Anytime you take an action, you might get to put a check on a skill, and that check on a skill might turn into an improvement for the skill. And so you have this constant feel like you're improving. That's fun, just like it is in, whatever MMORPG you're playing. And it's also unreliable, which is one of the things that improves operant conditioning if the response is often there, but it's there on an irregular schedule. And so I think that all just makes the game fun and something I go back to. But there's also historical things that I think much as, with Legend of the Five Rings are irreproducible. It was not the first fantasy role-playing game after D&D. That was probably Tunnels and Trolls by most definitions. You can get EPT in there as a possible one too, and some smaller stuff. And it was really well supported in the UK by Games Workshop. And so between those two things, it actually was a competitor to D&D very, very briefly. It came out in 78. D&D started really blowing up in 1980 or so, after the James Dallas Egbert affair got everyone's attention, and then Mazes and Monsters and the satanic hysteria and all of that. And so it was a brief period, but RuneQuest was really big, and so there's people that remember it from that. They remember it when it was the alternative to D&D, and if they were in the UK, they remember it as one of the several big games that were brought in and really well supported by Games Workshop. And so there's this, I think, core of really deep fandom from a very early point in the industry, which is impossible to match now.
Huh. Wow. Well, this has been a wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah, but about historic things, which we are both versed in. Deep in, as we might put it otherwise.
So you running anything interesting right now?
I am continuing to write. My next project that I am just finishing up are what I call the Lost Histories, in which I am repeating the format of the company histories for another 400,000 words of histories.
Please continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I got half a book on more companies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and odd odds each. And then I got about a book and a half on the 10s, which other than converting the product histories, which became Designers and Dragons Origins, that's the other top request I've got. Where's the 10s? And the answer is it's going to Evil Hat in about 5 or 6 months, because I've been working on that since 2022, the same time period I've been working on Origins since. I'm also going to be expanding Origins in that I've already done the first book on AD&D 2nd edition, and I'm most of the way through the second one. It's interesting to see how much AD&D blew up in the 90s, which of course is much of what's going on in your book, Slaying the Dragon. I've got 6 books laid out for 1989 to 2000, which is AD&D 2E, as opposed to the 4 books I had from 74 to 88.
Yeah, I mean, staff members would tell me that it felt like at TSR in the 90s, they were just flinging product out the door, just like move, go. And one of the nice things about 5th edition was that era where it was like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to, 2 releases a year, maybe 3 for a few years, was kind of nice. And it was interesting because, they discovered they could sell about as many copies with less product. So
yeah, I had concerns at the time that they were strangling the rest of the industry, that without TSR, Wizards of the Coast, putting out product, people weren't going to be going to game stores and seeing the rest of the things. But I feel like we've arrived at kind of the happy medium now, where they're putting out, what, a dozen books a year, 6 books a year, somewhere in that range. And so it's not as rapid as during AD&D 2E, where they were putting out dozens and dozens of books a year. But it's not like, at the start of 5e where they were putting out, as you said, 2.
Yeah, like, let me look. What's their upcoming release schedule? Pardon me. Sorry. Let's see. October 2nd, 2025. Here are the upcoming titles for D&D. This is from Wargamer, which I find to be pretty good. So Forgotten Realms Player Guide is coming up. Forgotten Realms Adventures Guide is coming up. Lorwyn First Light crossover book. So 3 things in November. Eberron Forge of the Artificer in December. And that's for the year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things, which seems reasonable. You know, not entirely out of hand in any way, shape, or form.
I appreciate the fact that they've been able to move beyond mostly adventures, and they've been able to move past mostly Forgotten Realms to give a bit more diversity to the line.
So a lot of people have been complaining about, I hope I'm saying his name right, Dan Ayub. It looks like an Arabic name, so I'm going to pronounce it like it's an Arabic name because I speak Arabic. So a lot of people have been complaining about Dan Ayub and his franchise model, saying, hey, we're going to, bring D&D back. You're going to see a lot of it. And we are interested in, what did he say? He said he was going to bring everyone in-house in some way, shape, or form, working on D&D, get everyone on the same page, and also license D&D out to a lot of people, which is exactly what the 5th edition team did and planned to do. Like, that was the 5th edition playbook, and it seemed to work. So when I read what he was saying, I was like, oh, seems good. But the world seemed to throw up its hands in horror. Then again, the world throws up its hands in horror anytime anyone at Wizards of the Coast acknowledges that D&D should make money. The world seems to be like, gasp, horror. It's like, well, we wanted to make money, guys. We and girls. But and we're also talking a couple days after Joe Manganiello posted a picture of him with Laura and Tracy Hickman, Margaret Weiss, and I think Dan Ayub, talking about something, gathering. I think I want to say they were gathering in Seattle to talk about the future of Dragonlance. And to me, everyone saw that and they were like, ooh, interesting, exciting. They seemed very happy by that, about that. But I look at that and I'm like, that is a consequence of this franchise model that he was talking about in the first place. Like, this is the kind of thing that you would expect to see. And everyone was horrified by, but now that they're seeing it, they're happy, which may be the nature of the nerd. Oh, you're gonna do a thing, I don't like it. Well, oh, what's the thing? Oh, that I'm actually fine with. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was saying that I thought when 5e originally came out, one of the problems was how few products they put out. That and a licensing model lets them put out more. And I think people have forgotten the fact that just 5 years ago or so, that Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss literally had to sue Wizards of the Coast to be able to produce the latest trilogy of Dragonlance books that they put out. And this is just such an about face that we have gone from, and they weren't the only licensee that year that had to fight Wizards of the Coast to get the rights that they'd already signed contracts on. So the fact that Wizards of the Coast has gone from being hostile to licensees to, actually saying we really are welcoming them, that's a huge change. I am not sure that making a license agreement with Wizards of the Coast is a great idea, given their past things that they've done to licensees like Hickman and Weiss. Like I said, they had contracts, and then Wizards of the Coast withheld their approvals, it probably in violations of the contracts, and so they couldn't go anywhere with them. I think that the big problem is the word franchise. People hear franchise and they think, there's going to be role-playing companies setting up on every corner serving greasy role-playing burgers or something. And
Sounds
I think
yummy.
I think if they just said we're setting up a licensing model rather than a franchise model, that might be very different. I certainly have the same knee-jerk reaction when they say franchise. But the whole thing's been so poorly defined that I don't know what they're doing exactly. If they're doing something more like, you know, just putting their name on whatever crap they can get money for, that's probably bad for the brand, but not necessarily bad for our content because we'll be able to pick out the good stuff. But if they're actually choosing licensees that are, making good pitches and going to produce good products, and they're people like Weiss and Hickman, and maybe new role-playing companies that want to do good content, because I'd kind of hate to see some of the old people dragged back in when they're doing their own stuff. All right, that sounds great. So I guess the question is it really franchise with all of the baggage that goes with that term, or is it just licensing with all of the benefits we can see?
Well, I just pulled up the LinkedIn post that I've been talking about, and I would agree with you that like part of the problem is the what they said and how they described it. Because so Dan Ayub writes, so what happened today? We shifted our structure internally, and D&D moved to a full franchise model. Meaning, and again, first part of the sentence, I would agree with you. I have it like my otaku self is like, grr, franchise. But then he finishes the sentence, meaning everything, books, video games, film, and TV, everything touching the franchise lives under one roof, which is exactly what Nathan Stewart did, and it's one of the reasons that 5e, I think, was a success. So doing that sounds great. Like that structural move, great idea. And I am not a business guy or a marketing guy, so like, but I don't think anybody got to the end of the sentence. So we all just saw a franchise and we were like, oh! And vomited in our laps. But what else anything else you want to talk about? We're winding down. I can't believe we're winding down.
Yeah. I'm just kind of curious. So, my new books are product histories from, TSR, anytime in TSR. What would you consider maybe their most innovative book? And what would you consider maybe their worst book? You don't have to answer the latter one if you don't want.
TSR most innovative? I would say Planescape myself. The original Planescape box set would be my answer, because, and again, I'm just going to tell you things but for the audience, it was in many ways a response to the World of Darkness, to games where you could engage socially and philosophically, and it was an attempt to bring that into D&D. The setting, has more flavor than an Indian buffet, and I believe it is one of the many claims to fame of Zeb Cook. Man, now there's a guy with a long career. Worked on first edition, lead designer of second edition, working with Steve Winter and John Pickens. And then he goes on and designs I believe the greatest setting to come out of TSR. Again, like Forgotten Realms is very, very good. There's certainly other good settings. But the way that Cook engaged with, he had a conversation essentially with the White Wolf designers about what they'd been doing through his own work. And that is the sign of someone operating at a very high creative level. And he did it all while working for a corporation. And maybe he might have made his boss the villain of the setting and the boss didn't notice, which is also pretty baller. So I would say that is the best one. Worst? Let's see. Man. Possibly the first thing that comes to mind is there was a Forgotten Realms anthology that Brian Thompson kind of farted out. No. It has to be one of the comic modules from TSR West.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
I'm gonna go with, I believe it's Intruder #1. Which, like, I think I have it here. I could dig it out in a minute, but like the comic modules were a wildly mixed bag. like some of them had very good art, some of them had really interesting ideas. Like there was the one where it was you're hunting space Nazis through time, which is a very cool idea. But Intruder, I want to say, was Quantum Leap. Like it had an idea very similar to Quantum Leap, and the art was just so bad, like stunningly bad. Like, and so art is just so easy to engage with, right? So I'm going to go with that comic module from TSR being the worst thing that TSR ever made. What would your two answers to that be? That's a great question.
Yeah, so I'm deeply in the AD&D, BD&D, OD&D era right now because that's where the product histories are. I definitely agree. Planescape's a great answer for a great product. It almost feels to me like it's from a different company from what I was writing about, because
that puts it so well.
Yeah, and just generally it felt like kind of when TSR went from the 80s to the 90s, there was just this real change, and it was because of their focus on settings, but they were suddenly willing to do stuff that was so far outside the box. I mean, the first of the New World settings was Spelljammer, and Spelljammer, was wacky science fantasy that they'd never done at that level, and I think in that depth before. But I'm going to stay in the period that I was just writing about, because it's all just so deeply ingrained in my head right now. I think maybe one of the best products that they did in that era was Aaron Alston's The Grand Duchy of Karamikos. And it's a good product. If you looked back at it now, you might not be quite as astounded by it. But the reason I'd put it as one of the top ones is that it was utterly groundbreaking. I mean, TSR UK went over a lot of the same ground in Night's Dark Terror, which was an adventure set in Karamikos, and it gave a lot of the underlying foundation for the setting. But 1987, early 1987, to put out a full, I forget if that one's 64 or 96 page, one or the other, book, just detailing one part of a fantasy world, that was maybe literally unknown. As you said, John is very right, and trying to say first is, you're always going to get it wrong if you try and say first. This was the thing that really showed, hey, here's a big company doing this. And they then proceeded over the next couple of years to just put out any number of gazetteers for the known world. And several months after they started the gazetteers, they started the Forgotten Realms line, where they were doing the same thing. But that first one by Aaron Alston, and I think you really need to credit, probably more than Aaron, Bruce Hurd, who kind of took over the basic D&D line as the acquisitions editor, because they were all being done by external people like Aaron, because no one at TSR cared. But just the innovation of that is so great that even if it's a less polished product, a less possibly deeply themed product than Planescape, I think for both of those, just its place in history is so notable.
Well, and I picked up the Karamikos Kingdom of Adventure box set in 1994. It came with a CD. When again, it was designed as a beginner product because they were obsessed with beginner products at the time. But it was magnificent. Like, I picked it up and then I read it quickly in an hour and tried to run it for my friends, because again, it was one of those products that was so inspiring that it demanded to be run almost instantly. But please continue.
Yeah, and I think Aaron didn't directly work on that. I think it was revised by someone else. I'd have to go look at my history.
My gut is Jeff Grubb. I'm looking at the drive-through page now.
Yeah, you're right. It's Jeff Grubb.
Oh, wait, go ahead. Sorry.
But it was still, he was putting together Aaron's original stuff, and so that's very interesting that you found it so inspiring 7 years or so after it came out, when the industry had moved much more to doing these geographical splat books, that you still found the foundational text so innovative. And I mean, Aaron was a great writer, both for role playing and for fiction later on. So I think that probably comes through. And So you put his great writing with Bruce's great idea, and that's why it was certainly one of the best that TSR did.
When Aaron Alston did the rules compendium for the rules cyclopedia, right?
He did. So
and again, if you're
Aaron,
good,
Aaron pretty much hit every core book that Basic D&D put out. Pretty much from Karamikos to the rules cyclopedia, and so like he also did the Wrath of the Immortals, and I flag a few more. I don't remember quite what they are, but if Bruce was the general leading the work on the known world on Basic D&D, then Aaron was certainly the lieutenant who got all of the prime jobs and excelled at them.
Well, for a long time, if you asked me, you can only take one role-playing game book with you to a desert island. What's it going to be? For a long time, the Rules Cyclopedia was my answer. Now I would probably say Shadowdark. But again, I feel like Shadowdark is... There are a number of role-playing games that were clearly inspired in their layout and design by the Rules Cyclopedia, and Shadowdark is one of them. But again, because it had everything in one book, magic items, character creation, combat rules, monsters, and the monster entries in the Rules Cyclopedia, it's just like a chef's kiss. It's so usable, and the indexing is so good. So easy to run at the table. Like it was the one time I only ran using the Rules Cyclopedia like 2 or 3 times, but the first time I did it, it was a revelation because it was just so fast. Everything was so easy to find.
I fell in love with old school essentials for much the same reason that Gavin just put everything in these little 2-page spreads. They're amazing, and that was the game that I got started with, of course, too, BX, and so that made it very intriguing to me. But it was the graphic design, and there's so much of that in the OSR. It's one of the things I find the most enjoyable about it, that they really are looking at info display and learning and things like that, and reference in ways that most of the industry isn't.
All right. So other than D&D Origins on BackerKit, is there anything else that you would direct people towards?
My other recent book is This is Free Trader Beowulf, which is also over my shoulder. That is my system history of Traveler. It covers Traveler from the science fiction tabloids that Mark Miller was reading when he was going to school, to the actual design of Traveler, through all of the many companies that have published for it over decades and decades. It is a book that I dearly love, and I think came out really well. And if you are a fan at all of science fiction role-playing or Traveler, I suggest taking a look at it. It's out from Mongoose.
So I had 18 years of D&D financial data leaked to me. And again, it's a lot. So to kind of begin to start cracking it, I just started making charts. And I then gave a presentation on those charts at GameholeCon last week. And of course, I recorded it. And I'm going to put it on the Patreon for this podcast. So, listeners, if you are interested in getting a peek at what some of that looks like, the Patreon is a mere $3 a month. There's both audio and video of the presentation up there. I'd say you kind of have to use the video because the charts are not as much fun in audio format. So please, and there's a bunch of other content. Dr. Scott Bruner and I are very slowly reading the entire First Ed Dungeon Master's Guide aloud. I have interviews with Zeb Cook, Sandy Peterson, Ken Haidt, all behind a paywall up there. I posted I think a 50-page chapter on the creation of 3rd edition. So for the less than the price of a cup of coffee, I try to get you a lot of content. So Shannon, I'll send you that for free.
Well, I was thinking I should sign up for that Patreon.
Oh no! I cost myself a sale. Ooh.